Um, Today we're here with Frank Fazzino, right? Frank Fazzino from Husson College. This is actually, we're about to embark on the Husson, what I'm calling the Husson series, because we got the Husson coaches lined up with one little squeak in between them. There's three Husson coaches presenting. We have Frank, we have Tristan, and we have Kate Goopy presenting, and then Chris he's a sprint. We have one guy named Chris. He's the sprint coach from UMaine. He's kind of snuck in there in between the Husson coaches. So our next couple sessions are going to be with the Husson coaches and a coach from UMaine, and we're starting. So I'm calling it the Husson. I've dubbed it the Husson sequence, or the Husson sessions. That's what I dubbed it. And we're excited about that. I think it's going to be great. So Frank, I really want to thank you for being here and taking your time and both building a presentation for us and sharing your knowledge with us all. It's awesome to have you here. And again, I want to thank everyone for coming. And Frank, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for having me. Let's see if I can get a presentation going here. All right, Jamie, does that look like something's going on there for you?
Yeah, I got a presentation. You're ready to go.
Okay. All right. So thanks once again for having me. Bit of an honor to be asked to present something like this. A little bit about myself. My name is Frank Fazzino. I am the associate head coach at Husson University. I am the assistant coach for cross country, while my main focus during the season is coaching the throws and multi-groups. I am also the strength and conditioning coach for the entire team, so that includes every event group, as well as the cross-country program. I coached at the high school level for 4 years, and the last 6 have been at the collegiate level, both at Division II and III universities. I was originally a thrower. I went to the University at Albany, Division I program. But when I was first asked to start coaching, it was actually to coach the entire high school team that I graduated from. So it was a great honor to help take over that program. But they asked me to coach every event, which was a little bit of a challenge. But I feel like that gave me an opportunity to work with all the event groups and kind of understand the commonalities between them. So I think that's always been a point of my career where I'm always trying to be a student of the sport while keeping things simple enough where I can basically teach any athlete through the process. That being said, I'd like to get started with my presentation, and I think we're going to do a question and answer at the end, if I'm not mistaken. So let's get started. I wanted to start off with basically training basics before we get into the throws. A lot of the ideas I have kind of come from my strength and conditioning background. So when I do set this up, I usually set up a training plan going by our calendar of when we start training, when our competitions are, when we need to have peak performances, and finally when the season is ending. I'll normally set that up going backwards. So I'll look at my last date of competition and work back to my first date. That's usually how I go about it. If you're looking at graph 1 here, that's usually the type of graph you're going to be seeing if you're doing any sort of strength conditioning or event work classes. I know I've taken a few courses through the USTF CCCA. That's usually the first type of general idea they want you to kind of get a look at. That will start with very low intensity work and high volume. Then you're making your way through general prep, specific prep, and then when you're getting into competition, that'll be high intensity work with slightly varying but lower volume. I usually take this with consideration with my lifting programs from my athletes, but I also coordinate it with my training sessions, whether it's conditioning work or actually with the throws themselves. Um, Early in the season might be a time where I am building my general conditioning up. Some of your athletes came back from a long summer of maybe not doing too much, so getting the conditioning up, developing strength, maybe getting some higher reps, possibly working with lighter weight throws. And I'm generally working on parts of the throw. Sometimes you come back from a long vacation and you're working on things from scratch because maybe we took a much longer break than we needed to. Towards the end of the season, if you're kind of going by the guidelines of the graph, maybe I'm working on higher intensity throws and less reps, mirroring my competition as I'm going through. I'd like to talk about the idea of adaptation. A key component to teaching a new skill is adapting the body to change according to the stimulus. I've found that a great deal of my athletes may be coming back from a limited background in the weight room. Either they didn't have a weight room at all, or maybe they just weren't taking the initiative to do any sort of strength and conditioning work when they were in high school. I know as a former high school coach, I would be in the weight room and often suggest, okay, right after practice, guys, or right before, we can go into the weight room and do stuff before practice. And if it's optional, it's not always something they're going to take advantage of. I think a big thing was learning the Olympic lifting when I started working with my college athletes, because a lot of them were not familiar with them. Cleans, snatches, jerks. And starting off learning the basic movements of those, I think people think that they are getting stronger immediately, and that's not necessarily the case. It's more of adapting to the actual movement. And after a few weeks of doing it repetitively, it starts to look a little more fluid. Same goes for throws. Depending on the background of the thrower I'm working with, maybe they were just doing standing throws because they were strong enough in high school, or maybe they were a glider, but they probably would be a little bit better as a spinner. So kind of looking at it that way. We're kind of starting from scratch at the most part. But the main focus I want to always have is constantly keep the body adapting for the athlete. And to go along with that, I want to talk about overload and burnout. When we're looking at adaptation, we should be giving the athlete more technical aspects of the throw for them to work on. A big idea I've learned is you don't have to wait for them to master it. Just kind of keep progressing, and they'll start figuring it out as you keep adding more movements and adding more speed. If I want to wait till it's absolutely perfect for a standing throw before I move on to a glide, I might be wasting valuable training time. So I want to start phasing in full throws as soon as possible. Their timing and coordination's probably going to be completely off when we begin with it. but you're giving them that stimulus so they can be forced to adapt, basically. With the strength portion of this, you'll be looking at graph 2 here. That's kind of what my preseason looks like in regards to max testing for weight room stuff. If we're working on, let's say, squats, the level of intensity is going to go up for the first 3 weeks, and then I'm going to do a deloading week on week 4. On week 3, that's usually when I'll do my max testing, whether it's starting a max from the beginning of just working up and seeing what I can do for a 1 rep max, or by the time I get to week 3, I'm most likely going to be seeing how many reps I can get at that previous max. You'd be surprised that, you know, I have kids coming from a background of not squatting at all to, oh man, now I'm doing double my body weight within a few short months. So it'll repeat like that 2 or 3 times. I might increase my intensity for the first 3 or 4 months while I'm testing. And then I'm always giving them that lighter week right after to kind of let them recover. And an important idea of this is I'm also not going to be testing year round. If you did try to do something like that, most of the time, if I test it again 5, 6 months down the line, they're not going to see much more of an increase in performance. It actually might be opposite. I might just kind of peak and flatten out there, or I might see a decrease in performance because I'm trying to push the body a little too hard. So we'll have been talking about work and recovery to aid the overload. As you can see by that graph, we're giving them that week of recovery every time. When I'm making training plans, I'll usually work within a 4-week system. So everything is going week by week and month by month. Like I said before, so you'll see weeks 1 through 3 each get progressively harder, drop down for that deloading week in week 4, and I'll basically keep making the pyramid rise, sort of. So you'll see each 3rd week is getting even harder than the previous 3rd week. So that'll hopefully allow the body to gain a lot of strength and adapt along the way. So this goes along with my strength training, but it can also go along with any throwing sessions that you're having. Maybe I'm taking week 1, I'm working my way back into it of just learning the throws again, and then working up to week 3 where I am doing, you know, the highest normal amount of throws I can do in a session. Then I'll ease it back the next week. That way I can kind of build up on it again. So for creating workouts, I'm sure a lot of coaches kind of go through the same thing of, okay, I'm gonna make my workout depending on what I have available. So anytime I'm making a workout, I'm always thinking, okay, what equipment do I have? What facility is available? Do I have a facility at all? Is the weather cooperating once we get outside? And how can I get it from getting too repetitive? I believe that most of my training is built off of proper planning, but also at the same time being very adaptable. So for the most part, I haven't worked at a place yet where I would have the same facility at my disposal each day of the week. So whether it's sharing gym time with other teams, not having your own facility, or I'm sharing the facility that we're currently at with our team. So a lot of that is kind of to be determined week by week, or if I'm lucky enough, I'll know ahead of time, maybe a couple months. So that will aid in the fact that, okay, I know where I am today. I know what kind of workouts I can do. Let me see what I can do off that. I consider myself pretty lucky with the facilities we do have. Whether we're doing something in the weight room or I have gym time that we can do some sort of conditioning and also light throwing if I want to. And plenty of field space to do any sort of running or light throwing outside. And of course, if we're renting a facility, we have UMaine right down the street, and we can use their throwing facility, which is awesome, and it makes it safe for the throwers to actually do it in a safe environment. So along that, I want to talk about conditioning and specificity. Ideally, I want to be practicing aspects of the throw as much as possible. That ensures I'm getting enough repetition for sound form. Now, I think this is where some athletes may mistake the idea that we need to be in the circle throwing every single practice all the time, or else I'm not going to figure it out. While I want to work on throwing form constantly, I also want to be getting faster, stronger, more flexible to help aid in my form. This is why I think incorporating conditioning that is specific to throws, and I want to be able to understand the commonalities of the training components. So my training components, I think it's pretty similar to everybody else's. Obviously throwing, this is going to be once again determined on what I have available. Based on experiences, I might get a throwing facility or gym to work in maybe twice a week. So I'm using that time to get as many reps possible to work on the form with an actual implement. So basically what I'll do is I'll know when my throwing days are and I'll work everything else around it. Varying from time of the season and also depending on how the weather is doing that time of the year. Strength, I think the weight room is probably my best friend when we're not in the circle. We can focus on so many aspects of the throw there, whether we're doing Olympic lifting, static lifting, any sort of power, plyometric type deal. We can work on power, speed, balance, etc. So with the static lifts, I'm going to be doing variations of the squat, front, back, single leg, variations of presses, the flat bench, incline bench, overhead presses, and then working with the Olympic lifts, again with the cleans, snatches, and jerks. I think they're a great tool in mimicking the throw with that explosive power and speed that I need for all throwing. General strength is another component. I use a lot of calisthenics, core work, circuit training. I think these are great options, especially if you're limited on space or equipment. When I was coaching high school, I think during the indoor season, I maybe had 60 or 70 athletes at one point in time. So getting them all into the weight room to use certain equipment wasn't really possible because we had a smaller weight room at the time. So that's why I relied on doing a lot of core and body weight exercises. That gives us some strength training for a limited time, and especially if I'm working with a bigger team. And speed work. Throwers got to run occasionally. I like to do short sprints, mainly focusing on acceleration. Normally that'll be between like 10 to 40 meters. We're throwers, we don't have to run too far. Unless we're working maybe on the jab, I might do a little bit longer with them, but everybody else, we're gonna keep a nice short minimum there. And with the sprinting, you're also working on those fast twitch muscle fibers that are the ones that we're going to be using during the throw, so it helps them develop a little better. Lastly, multi-jumps and multi-throws. Plyometrics and medicine ball workouts are a great source of working on the technical aspects of the throw, as well as conditioning for it. They're great workouts that I'll use several times of the week. You can do an in-place plyometric circuit almost anywhere if you're in a gym type space. With limited space, and if you're working with a larger group, it's something that you can kind of just do by time and have the athletes move from one circuit to the next kind of thing. And on days where you can actually work with the implement, using a medicine ball workout, whether you're doing a circuit or actual doing throws with the medicine ball, is a great supplemental workout to have. So talking about the commonalities, I talked a little bit earlier about how, watching all the events, you kind of start to learn their similarities. What I also like to teach the athlete when I'm describing my type of workouts, understanding the commonalities with each one. So for that, usually I'm asking, how does this all come together? So if we're looking at the finish delivery position of the throw, sprints when I'm getting full acceleration coming out of blocks, doesn't have to be out of blocks for throwers, but that starting phase into acceleration. Any sort of plyometrics or maybe a med ball release. And then we're looking at strength training here with the Olympic lifts. I believe this is showing stick figure doing a power snatch. So with all of that, we're working on what's called a triple extension of the body. That triple extension is basically the straightening of the ankles, the knees, and the hips. And you can kind of see that point where when we're accelerating or finishing the throw or we're jumping or we're lifting, we're always getting that triple extension. It's a nice, quick, forceful movement. And when an athlete usually comes to me their freshman year, they ask me that question of, Coach, why aren't we throwing every day? Looking at the similarities between all these sources of training, we kind of are in a sense. Even when we're running, I'm learning to accelerate. I'm getting that triple extension over and over again. So we're getting repetitions, all at varying intensities, without needing to throw daily. And to be honest, I've seen people get very stale and their form gets a little off after they've been throwing constantly for weeks on end. So we're giving our workouts some variety over a long season to allow our athletes to stay engaged and not become bored. That being said, I do have athletes that come from other sports too. I think that the main focus that we should try to get is to, if we can, get through the entire season with the athlete staying healthy. We want to avoid injury at all cost. So if you have your lineman who's been training since the summer, now he's joining you for indoor and outdoor. He's been training for a majority of the year, whether it's going to camps over the summer, going back through the spring, working with you. For those kind of athletes especially, we want to take note that the main causes of injury is usually with repetitive movements. So We want to take a look at our training plans and make sure that we're giving them enough variation when we're trying to avoid injury as much as possible. Um, we want to keep them healthy for the entire season, and honestly, sometimes we need to take a mental break away from the throw anyway. I know I've had a thrower or two over the years where it's, oh, I need to be throwing today. Maybe if we took a little more time away from the throw, it'll allow you to relax next time we get in there. So taking a mental break, nothing wrong with that from time to time. Now talking about the throw, it's probably what most of you are looking for when we're actually assessing the throws. I'm going to kind of talk in some key similarities between the shot, disc, and jab. Questions at the end, feel free to ask something a little more specific, but these are kind of the main things I like to focus on when I'm starting off with the basics of a throw. So when I'm critiquing the throws, I usually have a few general ideas that I want to make sure I get correct before I'm moving into anything more complicated. The base, right as I'm having my delivery phase, talking about my setup of my feet. And I've always lived by the motto that proper preparation prevents poor performance. So I want to make sure I have a good setup and a well-balanced base before I throw. For this, in all three throws, a cue that I learned from one of my coaches previously was to focus on getting on the tracks. And what I mean by that is you can kind of see in these different images, we have two throwers in the back and one from the front. You have the left shoulder lining up right above the left foot. And same with the right side, we have the right shoulder lining up above the right leg. For that, just thinking of an idea, just being balanced. Anytime you have an athlete that's kicking out too far, kicking into the bucket, or you have your feet kind of exactly even, you're sort of falling out to the side. A lot of people might know this as having a good heel-toe relationship before the throw. And I think the idea that was taught to me of staying on the tracks is once I have that heel-toe, making sure that my legs are underneath my upper body in order to support me, to keep me balanced. So you can see that in each throw, you want to be focusing right underneath the right, left underneath the left. Anytime you see that from the back or even the side, that there's a balance issue, it's most likely that needs to be fixed. Anytime we land off balance, that's probably when you'll see the throw go to either side of the sector rather than right down the middle where we want it. And that's kind of something that you should be looking for if I can finish with the balanced throw. Moving in the stages of the throw, the setup, I always have an issue maybe dealing with my younger throwers is being patient. For the most part, I'll get the idea of, okay, if I glide out the back as fast as I can, I've got all the speed behind me, and that'll generate a really quick and powerful throw. So if I'm looking at the shot put, for example, you get that glide that kicks back. For the most part, that person lands completely out of control, and then they end up either fouling out of the circle or they're not able to utilize their whole body to throw. I remember one of my athletes always just telling me, no, coach, it's fine. Speed is key. As soon as I start moving faster, it's going to be a good throw. Don't worry about it. And for me, I like speed. I think it's great to have speed, but I want to have that control. And if I can't control it, usually I'll have issues in the delivery or even the recovery phase, and you'll see the athlete flying out of the circle. I would always rather have a slow start and then accelerate through the middle of the circle. That way I can really be able to push the ball a little more effectively. Full body throw. Going along with that idea of patience, we want to make sure that we're taking our time to set up the throws so we can effectively use our entire body. Kind of like I used the example before of a glider coming out the back too quick, then maybe they're not patient enough. They stand up immediately, and now they're probably just throwing with their upper body only. So now the end result is I've rushed out the back. I'm probably not going to be able to use my legs or my core. And now my shoulders are probably going to end up doing most of the throwing for me when I have stronger muscles in my legs and core that are not being utilized. So with the full body throw, I want to see the body kind of work in stages. Normally I'll tell the athlete, let's kind of separate the body up into 3 parts: lower body, core, upper body. If we're looking at discus and we're kind of in that airborne phase going into transition, here I'll encourage the athlete to get that right foot down as quickly as possible if we're talking about a righty thrower. Because the more time I'm hanging in the air is less time that my feet actually are able to turn. So I want to have my right foot down right in the middle of that circle, but do it quick enough to where I can keep my legs moving. This is allowing us to create that torque with the core muscles. So as the core starts to become twisted and tightened as we get into that transition phase, we should have the base set up with our legs, as you can kind of see in that transition P4. My feet are set up. They should be a little bit ahead of my chest. And my chest and my shoulders should be facing the back of the circle as much as possible, while my legs are now driving to the front of the circle. I always use the analogy of kind of like twisting a rubber band. You're creating that tension and you want the rubber band to snap. So my core, in a sense, is that band kind of tightening up, keeping that chest back long enough. By the end of it, my arms will force to be pushed through, just because of how tight my core is. And I'll be able to use my legs, my core, and my upper body in 3 separate stages. Because you want to give each part of the body enough time to get that really good stretch reflex in the muscle. So it lengthens, it tightens, and then we kind of see a nice quick reactive movement from it. Finally, we look at the delivery phase. In each of the throws, I'll probably use javelin for this example. As we're looking at that sort of bow or reverse C, some people call it, that position of where your shoulders are slightly back, and you can see that C. I think the javelin shows it the best with, you can kind of see that curve from the jab going all the way down the spine to the back of the leg. This is the stretch reflex that we want to see. You have that bow position set up. The upper body can finally come into play when we're throwing. A lot of times you see eager throwers rush that arm and, okay, I didn't necessarily get that stretch reflex yet. So you want to focus on keeping the arm back as long as possible. Then you have the lead arm pulling tight to the rib cage. In this case, it'll be the thrower's left arm. That way, now I'm creating all the tension in my arm. Once again, with that rubber band, I'm stretching it as much as possible and then letting it go, letting my arm kind of follow through naturally and snap through. That way, I'm effectively finishing the throw. Lastly, I kind of want to talk about just kind of coaching ideas when I am coaching in a practice versus a meet and different times of the season. If we use this graph again when we're in general prep, specific prep, competition, I want to progress in intensity over the season. I also want to think of this as a progression in skill and form. So, maybe I have a thrower who's trying out a new throw for the first time, and they just need a confidence boost of getting a few standing throws in the first meet or two. Totally okay with me, but I always want to be pushing what they can do, what their ability level is. So whether it is adding different parts to the throw or maybe adding a little more speed to a certain part of it, I always want to be challenging the athlete's ability. So we're pushing them to get better. Unfortunately, with this idea comes the idea of a good amount of trial and error is going to be happening here. I'm going to get some inconsistent throwing anytime I add something in new, most likely. Maybe I fix one thing and another issue arises. But learning is going to come with plenty of mistakes, and it is going to take patience from the athlete, but more importantly from you. A lot of the time, an athlete will ask me if they're unsure, can we go back to just doing this? Well, we've seen you hit that mark already. So, you got to start adding in new things. That way you can advance the throw and we can see progression. Unless you want to stay throwing the same mark every time, that's not the kind of consistency I want. Meets versus practices. I always want to think of a meet situation as the best form of practice. It's a little more pressure, obviously, but depending on the type of the season, depending on the time of the season, we can kind of experiment with form a little earlier on. Not every athlete moves the same way, and usually I'll try to figure out those adjustments in practice. And I kind of want to try them out in a meet setting to see if they're actually working. Whether I have to fix something or the athlete just needs to kind of be a little more positive with the change and is comfortable making that movement. Really all depends. But that's something you'll learn over coaching. I think that we just need to make sure that we're constantly progressing. So even if I'm getting a meet where I'm fouling or I'm not getting a consistent throw, the point is I want to kind of keep pushing through these movements to help the athlete understand the progression. When we're nearing towards the end of the season, hopefully I've worked with the athlete enough and we've smoothed out a lot of the issues. So now we can kind of focus on, all right, we know what our throw looks like. Let's try to focus on consistency and, getting good positions as consistent as possible. And now maybe my focus is, all right, we've added some different movements. Let's try to make sure we're getting a safe throw where we can get that in without fouling. When as earlier in the season, you have a session where maybe you foul out. I'm okay. We learned something that day. That's fine with me. Now the athlete might not see the same benefit, but you have to kind of work with them on that of, okay, when we get to the end of the season and maybe I need 3 extra throws, so I'm okay taking a safer throw, maybe slowing something down or doing a half throw just so I can get in the finals. And then maybe moving back to that full throw that we were trying to work on earlier. Maybe I just needed 1 safe throw in order to get me there. That I feel like is taking a step backwards real quick in order to move forward. But for things like that, I just kind of rely on my best judgment and how to advise my athlete to continue. So a great tool that seems to be a lot more accessible now than ever, really, since most coaches can now film stuff on their phones or they have tablets. I feel like video analysis has become such a great tool rather than having to just see everything by eye. It gives us an opportunity to look at the beginning of the throw a little slower and see how things progressed. When I'm looking at mistakes, I always want to think of it as the ABCs of any mistake. A lot of time when we're just watching stuff by eye, maybe I'll see the last mistake that the athlete made in their throw. That'll be the thing that stands out to me the most. But if I'm looking at the film, maybe I'll notice a mistake before that and before that that are actually the main reasons that the final mistake happens. So A being my first mistake, maybe if I was able to look at the film, I go back and I fix that A. Then possibly it fixes B and it fixes C. And I think of giving the athlete feedback, I always want to keep things as simple as possible. So it might be 1 or 2 cues to kind of give them to work on in the throw. So with that idea, if I'm thinking of 3 different mistakes they just made, what if I just give them that A mistake? And once they fix that, maybe they'll fix 2 or 3 other things without them even realizing that was part of the issue. And if not, we can kind of work through them and see which mistakes might correlate with one another. So coaching style and athletes. For me, my coaching style has always been about adapting. Each school I've worked at, each new athlete, it always becomes a new learning opportunity for me. And I feel that it helps me find new ways of teaching. Each person learns slightly different, and that requires us to make explanations in different ways. So if I'm explaining things to one thrower about how to fix something, and I say the exact same cue to another one, and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, coach, that's fine with me. I'm okay with them openly communicating that maybe a certain cue doesn't make sense to them. So as I learn with them, it helps us, okay, maybe I'll explain it a different way. And if you understand it like that, now I have something that maybe I can use with another athlete later on down the line. But I always want to make sure we have that good conversation of, do you understand what I mean by this? If the athlete simply is just nodding their head and telling me, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about, coach, then they keep making the same mistake over and over again. Now we're kind of just wasting more time than if they had originally told me, hey, coach, honestly, you're going to have to say something different because I don't know what that means. That's okay with me. So as long as we get that communication done as soon as possible, I don't mind explaining it a different way or needing to demonstrate it or show them with a drill. Whatever gets them to understand, as quick as possible without causing confusion. Um, so with that, communication is key, and as long as we understand one another, I think that will help us both adapt to each style of learning and coaching. Um, Finally, for most things, I've learned that it's just better to keep things simple. A lot of these kids, I'm working at Division III right now. You're not doing it for a scholarship. You're doing it because you built that passion, especially out of high school. That's one of the main reasons I wanted to continue throwing in college. I really built my passion in high school working with my coach. And it's kind of an honor to keep that going and continue that cycle of continuing to teach. So, you learn from a great coach, you pass that on to an athlete, and it's just great to, watch them learn and experience new things of, the sport that you learned when you were a younger thrower. And this is great. I like to keep things fun and lighthearted when I can. We're hanging out, we're just throwing rocks and spears around, having a good time. We could be out there running repeat 400s, and nobody really wants to be doing that. So I think that being a thrower, you want to keep that passion alive with the athletes and just keep going. And because another coach took the time to do it with you, I think you owe them enough to keep that passion alive. So I want to thank everybody for coming out, listening, and hopefully you were able to get something from me talking. But I appreciate having to kind of keep this cycle of teaching and learning alive. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to email me there. That's my contact info. And be passing it back over to Jamie. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.
I have a question, Frank. So
Sure.
I was looking at the graph, and it looks like you use like the idea of like micro and macro cycles, and like you're using like a 3-week or I can't remember if it's called the 3-week or the 4-week microcycle with that 4th week of recovery. With the high school season being so short, so it kind of makes us rely on indoor if we're lucky enough to have athletes that do both indoor and outdoor.
Sure.
How much rest do you put in between? So, I see that you put 1 week in between kind of the 3-week microcycles. When how many microcycles do you incorporate a longer rest after like say 4 microcycles, or do you just kind of continue with the progression of a microcycle until say your preseason into your season and then to completion? Like, how does that work for you?
So kind of with, let me actually go back to that graph I had earlier. Hold on a second. All right, so if we're talking about this second graph over here.
Right.
So for that, this is just a general, 0 to 10 intensity, but that might be what I'm doing for maybe 3 or 4 cycles,
Okay.
a 4 week. After that, I've learned we're just kind of working on maintenance. So in reality, maybe I'll need 3 months to get them as strong and quick as I actually need them. After that, I'm just kind of working in cycles of similar, but I'm not trying to make them any stronger after that. So if I do all my testing here, I want that only to continue for maybe 3 to 4 months in my preseason. Um, After we get to using this as an example, um, like you can see that the intensity sort of like levels out when we're in pre-competition competition. That's basically what it is. I am not going to be able to drive the intensity any higher. So that'll kind of level out for the rest of the season, sort of. But it'll go in waves, just like the other micros have done in the past. So yeah, it'll kind of go the whole year, if that makes any sense. But I'm not getting any more progression out of it.
Oh, okay. So I see what you're saying. So let me see if I get it. If I'm
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
it.
that was a lot of rambling. Hopefully that made some sort of sense.
Yeah. So say we started in like say let's take the indoor season. Say we're skipping cross country and we're going right to the
Yep.
indoor season. You would do this. You would do like the say indoor preseason. You would do the kind of the peaks, the graph on the right. You would do that, get them to a certain strength level, and then
Mm-hmm.
kind of throughout the middle, it sounds like the middle to end of your season, you would kind of flatten out. You would kind of do maintenance. I'm thinking of throwers in particular. So you'd be doing maintenance lifts, keeping the strength, kind of shoring up the throws, maybe dial down, keep the intensity as high, but dial down the number of reps that they're doing with their throws, the number of throws they're taking, and kind of keeping that until the end of the season. And I guess my thing is, what happens between indoor and outdoor? Or is there like no break during the college season where they kind of just blend together?
Okay, yeah, no, totally. With that, I think it's important to realize that if you're going in college, even in high school, if you do have that athlete who's working all the way from indoor to the end of outdoor, you have so many months of training. Um, I'll kind of, as you're doing those deloading weeks every four, there might be a week or two where I'm giving them a little more recovery. Let's say I'm taking a week where I'm not touching weights at all. Maybe I'll just do like body weight circuits for a week instead of lifting, because I need to take a complete break from that. And even if it's more just of a mental break, I'm totally okay with that as well. So depending on the athlete, yeah, if you have somebody who's good and they're going season to season, I think it's good to break up the monotony a little bit and give them either a complete reset of maybe a week off with some light training, or change up the training to the point where it's nothing to what I was doing previously.
Okay. All right. So you do okay. So right, they might not have a complete time off unless they like would proclaim that they would need like a complete time off, unless or showing you that they need a complete time
Yeah, I
off.
mean, if I'm seeing an injury or something like that and they need a week of working with the trainers and just kind of working on rehabbing whatever injury, totally fine with that. But that'll maybe be a week where, all right, maybe I'm doing some cross training, letting you guys bike a little bit, do some pool workouts, um, anything to kind of let your body reset a little bit.
Right. And then I have another question. Earlier in the presentation, kind of in the same section, you had mentioned like you had said, well, say we're working on squats. So in your testing, when you hit that max testing um, week, are you
Mhm.
which lifts are you only choosing one lift that you're kind of working on for a cycle, or do you choose like two or three, or and if you're using all of the Olympic lifts, like which ones are you testing? I guess is my question.
What I'll do is once I've written a program, let's say I'll have clean and I don't know, squat on one day, bench and snatch on another. I'm just kind of making these up.
Yeah.
But when I get further into the season, what I'll do is I'll let them just continue doing the workouts. But when we get to all my power lifts, all my squats, benches, and all my Olympic lifts, those days on the week 3, that'll be where they're kind of repping it out. And I'll use a chart just to kind of estimate where their new max would be. But sometimes you're seeing such jumps in form where kids are getting like 10 reps at their former clean max. And then sometimes it's okay, let's add weight and retest completely just to see where you're at. But yeah, they will be there the entire week. So if I'm working on 3 Olympic lifts and 4 power lifts, that'll be a test week for me. Now the athletes will need that recovery week the next week for sure. But yeah, I'll run through the test of everything I was testing previously.
Okay, so you would test. So you're not going to focus on like squat as a measurement. Like you'll on squat day you'll test squat. On clean day, whatever that day is, you'll measure you'll take their reps and their weight, and then you do the math and come out to where their new 1 rep max is going to be. And then after the rest week, you adjust the weight and the reps, correct? Like after the rest week
Yeah.
into the next cycle.
I'll be doing maybe higher reps, but way lower weights.
Yeah.
Just to keep the body moving a little bit. But yeah, the percentages are maybe 50, 60% of what their max previously was, just to keep them used to the form, but really back off what they just did the previous week.
Right. And then when you go in, I guess my other question is when you then go into week. So week 1, 2, 3, you're testing on 3, they're resting on 4. Week 5, are you using like would you go like are you going to go to like 80% of their new 1 rep max? Is that like how you would go? So say they were at like
yeah, I might do that maybe week 6.
yeah, okay.
Maybe so as week 5 goes up, it'll be higher than week 1 or 2 was, just to kind of keep that mountain going up a little bit higher each time.
Right.
But yeah, then the percentage, it'll almost be the same percentages, but now I'm working with a new max, so it's higher intensity.
Okay, so week 5, you kind of let them ease back in, check their not ease back in, but because they're kind of back at their previous max instead of like 50% of it, they're working at 80% of their previous max. But then after like week 6, so it's really kind of the second week into the new cycle where you're introducing the new level of intensity and in the weight room basically by adding weight.
Yeah, that 80% might be possibly heavier than their 100% max the month before.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean it's a good system I've used. I've seen great results from it. But yeah, you're constantly letting them overload and pushing them to do heavier weights, and the body just kind of responds to it.
Right. How many weeks have you found personally? This is sorry that I'm monopolizing the questions. This is just exactly kind of where my house is right now, or where my mind is from our last season. How many weeks do you think you have of that overload process before you start to see athletes like plateau? And granted, I understand that this is different probably for every athlete. There's some athletes like you probably can dump weights to. But
I want to say for newer athletes, it might go a little bit longer. For your older ones, if I haven't returned to previous strength within a couple months, usually there's an issue. But within 3 months, I should be able to get as strong as possible. Maybe I'll go an additional month depending on how new they are to the lifting.
Right.
But yeah, I'll usually retest 3 times. So within 3 months, or a fourth if they let's say they had a bad week that week and they want an extra chance at it.
Right. So it's really we're really looking at like 12, like you're really looking at like 12 weeks to peak, I guess is my.
Yeah, 12 to 16. Yeah, in general.
12 to 16 weeks to peak. Okay, cool. Well, that answers my questions, Frank, and I appreciate your time. Carolyn, if you have any do you have any questions?
I do. I'll even put my face on here, maybe. I'm back with the testing too for questions. I did have the question,
Okay.
what lifts you did. You went over that. When you're in a testing situation, what's your whole protocol? Like, how do you warm up to do that max? Like, you don't just go and do your max. You're doing something.
No. Normally, what I'll do, they'll do their general warm up depending on whatever that is that day, and then with the lift itself, I don't just want to see that one at 100% normally. Maybe I'll do a set of like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'll make those like warm up sets for them. Let's say I'm starting at 75% and slowly working my way up every time I add a percentage, and I take away a rep, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
Okay, so let's say I'm squatting.
12 lifts going into their max, almost 5.
Yeah. So let's say I'm squatting, and my max is 100 pounds. Let's just say to make it simple. Maybe I'll do a set of 5 at 70 pounds, set of 4 at 80, set of 3 at 90, and a set of 2 at 95 pounds, just to work my way up. And those are kind of, you could use those percentages too if you really wanted to. They can be 70% of their max, 75, and just work your way up to 100, really.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. But I do know certain coaches will use a system where it's maybe I'm doing 5 reps of one that's all at 100%, but I would recommend doing warm-up sets prior to that.
So say we're trying to find I totally do. I'm going to run this idea by you. Just due to, we've tried to max athletes with that, and we're finding, and maybe, and I'm curious to see like what you think about fatigue. Because if if you use so many warm up sets, do you find that fatigues the athlete so they can't do their best, or are you like kind of okay with that fatigue and you use that like that new max that they have after that warm up set as the measurement, like just like kind of like just anticipating accepting the fatigue that would come from the others? Because obviously if you lifted 2 of 95% before, that's going to affect the 1 at 100.
Right. I will say that it'll be also on the experience of the athlete. If I have a freshman who's not coming from a lifting background at all, and this will sometimes happen by mistake, they'll get to their like 1 rep and maybe that weight was so easy for them, they're up at 10 reps.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, no, let's stop right there. That's way too many reps. We could probably add more weight on, and kind of just go back to basics of, all right, what can you lift for 1 rep? But with a more experienced athlete, I'll usually keep it within in 5 reps or under if I'm doing any sort of warm-up sets. Anything beyond that, I feel like, yeah, you might run into the issue of them being tired before they even get to their 1 rep max.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense to me. I get it.
Okay.
All right, Carolyn, any other questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to